Portugal is a remote country. Its continental side is sealed by the big neighbor Spain, and it faces the endless Atlantic Ocean. Its geographic remoteness is also mirrored in the soul of its inhabitants. While mentioning any other country, we can list a dozen characteristics, but we can hardly find anything to say about Portugal. As a heritage of the past, we still think of famous sailors, discoverers, and colonizers. The Portuguese themselves like to ponder on their glorious past, though the country is flourishing once again. Its borders have not been changed for 800 years. After joining the European Union, economic life and tourism picked up. More and more people discovered the coastal region of Algarve, where the beach season is from May to October. This 5.5 thousand square meter, 40-kilometer wide coastal strip, the former West Andalusia, is a direct continuation of the Spanish coast, with the same geographic and climatic advantages as Costa del Sol. What is it that makes it more special? It's the capricious rock formations which lend its unique romantic characteristic. Faro, the capital of Algarve, is the borderline. To the east, towards Spain, the coast is flat and sandy. To the west, it's more and more structured and scalloped, abundant in curved rocks and lagoons. These lend it its unique romantic character. A landscape with gently sloping, mild hills greets visitors to the inland. Faro has the only international airport of the region. It's worth renting a car here to roam through the corner of Europe. Even in prehistoric times, this settlement was a fishing village and port. In Roman times, it became an administrative center by the name of Ossanova. The widespread ruins of this can be found 10 kilometers from the present city center, next to Estói. Its main sites are the basilica and the ruins of the baths, destructed by an earthquake. The medieval Faro was burned by the Count of Essex and devastated by an earthquake in 1755. 1 year later, the village, rising like the phoenix, became the capital of Algarve, its most beautiful buildings originating from that time period. The center of the city is Francisco Gomes Square. Behind it, there's a small internal lake. To the right, the old town can be found. The bishop for whom it was named had the village rebuilt in the 19th century. This is how he earned the nice statue standing in the gate of the old town, accompanied by St. Thomas Aquinas, the patron saint of Faro. The walls and gates of the old town were built using ruins from medieval and other times. The episcopal palace still fulfills its original function, so it's not open for visitors. However, we must see Sé, which was built in the place of a mosque. This was the first Christian church of the region, which survived both the attack of the Britons and the earthquake. But it's true that it's somewhat eclectic due to the many reconstructions. This, however, does not reduce the virtues of the most famous organ of the country. The instrument, decorated with Chinese patterns, even has a pipe imitating the sound of a lark. The most famous artists of Europe have played this instrument. The City Museum exhibits the findings of the excavations of the neighborhood, while in the Museo Maritimo, we can see the history of sailing. Dom Fray Amador Aré wrote the following: "For thousands of years, the frightful and great ocean, in its injured pride, did not let people see into the secrets, for all the time it swaggered with wild storms and furious winds, and offered a final resting place for many noble and brave men in the depth of its frightening waters. But at last, the Portuguese gained victory over it." The three old churches of Faro are rich in azulejo decorations. This is the name of the exceptionally characteristic Portuguese painted tile work, its first artist having been Jorge Baradas. Grand castles, palaces, public buildings, and churches are often decorated with painted tile work, which cannot deny their Spanish, Moorish origins. Many fishermen live in the villages near Faro, looking for bait in the wetlands and swamps. Quarteira is mostly famous for its gypsy market. Travel agencies bring busloads of tourists here, those who are suffering from shopping fever. The markets of the town offer all the fruit, vegetables, and other food that the locals need to produce the domestic flavors of the Portuguese cuisine. In the warm climate, not only fruit and vegetables are grown that are usual in Europe, but also those that are indigenous to the subtropical zone, such as lemons, oranges, tangerines, pomegranates, figs, dates, and pineapples. The Portuguese eat relatively little meat and a lot of vegetables. In spite of this, their cuisine, although it's similar to the Spanish, is heavier and more rustic. The primary reason why masses of people come here is the market of the local gypsies. Those who reckon with the market of handicrafts and authentic items will be disappointed. There are a number of souvenirs, of course, but very few of them are really tasteful. There are more Chinese products, cheap bags, clothes, and shoes. Anyone who's left their bathing suit or sunglasses at home can replace these items here at a reasonable price. The bustle of the market is also a good opportunity to observe local people and to get accustomed to the Portuguese language. The language was brought to the Iberian Peninsula by the Latins. Out of many dialects, the language of Castile became the Spanish language, Catalan started its independent life, and the language spoken around Porto became the basis of today's Portuguese. It isn't easy to prove the relationship between these dialects that separated around the 1500s. Those tourists who speak Spanish should not count on making themselves understood. Moreover, the Portuguese like to shorten words and omit vowels as if they wanted to close their mouths on the sharp, salty air as soon as possible. Of the holiday resorts of Algarve, the one which is most similar to the conventional European resorts is Vila Moura. This cosmopolitan town was built on a 1,600 square meter area between Faro and Lagos, with all its luxury hotels and impressive yacht port. Vila Moura, with its luxurious shops and elegant restaurants, is mostly popular with well-to-do foreigners, in spite of the fact, or this might be just the reason, that it lacks all local characteristics. Algarve is becoming increasingly popular with sailors. It has a nice climate, the water is crystal clear, and the countless romantic little bays provide ideal places to anchor. In turn, the ports provide all the luxury and services that the passengers of these sumptuous ships are used to. In the port of Vila Moura, for example, we can find only 4- and 5-star hotels. It's possible to find all kinds of outdoor sports from horse riding to archery and from fishing to surfing. We can play volleyball and tennis, row a boat, or ride a bike. We can even go hunting not far away. Those who prefer indoor sports to the swelter of the sun can go bowling or play pool or squash. There's ample opportunity to swim either in the pool of the hotels or in the waves of the sea. The most typical sport here, though, is golf. There are 4 extensive 18-hole golf courses with ponds, rocks, groves, and flowers. And of course, there are places for practice, golf shops, and mini-golf for the family members. Some hotels have been built on the edge of the golf courses. Next to their terraces, little golf carts are parked. The designs of these courses were made by such renowned champions of this sport as Henry Cotton, for instance. Albufeira has become a popular holiday resort from a quaint little fishing village built on cliffs. On its old houses, we can observe the characteristic motifs of the architecture of Algarve. An example of this is the glass veranda. A peculiarity is the chimney top guarding Moorish heritage. This is usually a cylindrical whitewashed building element made of clay, the beauty of which is given by the perforation with geometrical patterns. In the whole country, the cityscape is made memorable by brick-red clay roof tiles. The most widespread is the tela da canudo, which is the same as the tiling method for monasteries in the Mediterranean. A characteristic of the grand palaces and churches is the overdone decoration. The so-called Manuel-style, in spite of its overflowing Baroque pomp, is a variation of the late Gothic. Since it was born in the time of discoveries, its patterns are often based on sailing and the sea. They are mostly representations of anchors, chains, ropes, and corals. One great advantage of the Manuel style was that it harmonized well with almost any other schools of architecture. This is what can be observed in the Portuguese mudéjar buildings. Of course, we can also find Azulejo decorations on houses here, which are painted tiles both inside and outside. It was an Arab invention to use tiles on the outside of the walls instead of paint and plaster, which peels off easily in the humid air. Another big advantage of this is it can be cleaned easily and that it can be decorated with artistic paintings and patterns. Between the old and new parts of Albufeira in the semicircle of cliffs, the sandy beach is sheltered from the winds, making it the favorite place of surfers. Surfing is not to be mistaken for windsurfing. On the surfboard, there's no mast or sail. It's mostly similar to a skateboard, but it's bigger and wider. Lying prone, they row with their arms, waiting for the moment when they can stand up and ride the long waves running towards the coast. Almost everybody comes to Albufeira for the waves, even if they would like to enjoy them without using a board. Armacao de Pera was founded in the 17th century by the Gallegos family. There are still not more than 2,000 people living in this lovely little town. In the old town, we can mostly find fishermen's houses. Its two churches are called Paris and San Francisco. The settlement is divided into two parts, the upper called Pera de Cima and the lower Pera de Baixo. On the sandy coast, an interesting bright spot is a secluded little fortress, which was expected to protect the local people from the attack of pirates. The 12-kilometer coastline is only besieged by tourists today. Just like in all maritime countries, where there's a great tradition of sailing and fishing, small churches and chapels are built on the seafront. The families of religious and often superstitious fishermen come here to pray during big storms. The beach of Carvoeiro is framed on both sides by small houses built on the steep rocky hillside down to the water. These are the real beach houses. The terraces of the houses at the bottom virtually stand in the sand of the beach. If some owners could no longer stand people looking into their windows all the time, they opened a coffee bar here and they went to live elsewhere. Or they simply rented out the rooms to foreigners. They come here for the bustle anyway. It's true that the long-stretching, unending sandy beaches similar to the Italian lidos or the French plage have their own appeal. But when the windless embrace of the scenic cliffs gives intimacy to the silky sand beaches, it's different after all. That is Algarve. It's mostly worth visiting for people who seek more than only fair weather, clear water, and silky sand, for those who like a scenic and diverse view characteristic of the beaches here by the capriciousness of nature. The fishing boats pulled up to the shore don't disturb the bathers. The most common kind is the 12-meter-long trawler, the Treneria, and the 5-meter crescent flat-bottom, high-bowed May Luna. All of them are painted bright colors, and often an eye is painted on the bow. This is what guards the boat when the skipper looks away. Little green shrubs and climbing plants cling in the cracks of the steep limestone cliffs on the coast, and in the water there are whimsical rock formations. The sight speaks for itself. A lookout place was developed over a deep rocky sinkhole nearby. This place is too dangerous for bathing, but it's an unforgettable sight. Those who want to spend a longer time here may have lunch in the snack bar built at the bottom of the dolina. The largest holiday resort of Algarve, Praia de Rocha, rimmed with rows of hotels, can be found 3 kilometers from the city of Portimão. Here we can choose from a wide variety of accommodations, from the large hotel complex resembling an Arab fortress to the familiar little guest houses. Many people buy apartments here, mostly foreigners who spend the majority of the year here. Praia de Rocha offers a scene that we can see on every postcard of Algarve. The scalloped coastline faces the African continent. The warm airflow and water currents coming from that direction determine its climate, which is a transition between Mediterranean and subtropical. The coastline differs from Faro to the east and to the west not only in its geographical but also in its climatic characteristics. The western side is called Barlovento, which means windward, and the eastern side is called Sotavento, or windless. Praia de Rocha is probably the place everybody thinks of when closing their eyes and calling the image of a beach to their minds. A cavalcade of shapes and covers opens up if we look down from the top of the 70-meter-high seawall. There are ochre and brick-red rocks which form arches, gates, tunnels, and caves, or simply reach to the sky like a dignified obelisk. Some of the cliffs rising from the sea are as flat as if they were especially prepared there for sunbathing. Others are so peaky that only seabirds can cling on to them. The sea is mostly shallow near the coast, so it's turquoise in color because of the sun reflected from the sand. Deeper water plays in the darker shades of aquamarine. The shadows of the sun-kissed rocks create new colors, and the shadows of the clouds create new shapes, which are crowned by the white crest of the waves. We can swim into the shallow lagoons and the dents of the cliffs, pass under the arches of the rocks, and sunbathe on the sand or on the rocky plateaus. If we want company, there's plenty of it, but if we want to enjoy the salty fragrance of the sea, the caressing warm water, the sun-heated rocks, and the entire wonderful world of Portugal in solitude, that's also possible. We can find several little bays and lagoons, which seem to be waiting only for us. On the sand of the beach, there are snack bars selling ice-cold refreshments, as well as ice cream carts and other street vendors offering their products. Those who walk out of the hotel and onto the rock shelf rising above the beach to watch the bathers, the volleyball players, the landscape, the ships, and the sea offering new sights all the time should remember to bring their binoculars and cameras. The cliffs seemingly floating and trembling in the warm vapor rising from the sea have inspired poets also. Sophia Breiner Anderson wrote the following in her poem Algarve. Light floats in light, above the dried earth, I want jellyfish, pasque flower, song and breath, and the ridge of rocks above the sea, a man carries his shadow to the hill. In the evening, carved out from cobweb light, light floats in light, and its broken lance is trembling. Not much is known about Portuguese literature beyond the country borders, although they do have a Nobel Prize winner, the poet José Saramago, who wrote his first novel at the age of 60. Lovers of sailing should by all means go to the recently built port. Here it's possible to buy or rent wonderful, colorfully painted apartments in an area full of flowers. We can even take delight in our boat lying at anchor while we have dinner on the terrace. The fenced, protected port pampers the sailors with a wide variety of services. Near the port, the historical center of town does not offer many attractions, but the main square has been renovated nicely. It feels good to sit on the terrace of a cafe in the orderly surroundings. It's a good place to wait, because from here depart the cruise ships and boats, taking visitors to the rock hollows, caves, and lagoons that can't be seen from the coast. It's worth seeing the fortress of Santa Catarina, which protected the coastline as a detached garrison of Portimão and Silves. All place names starting with Al denote Arab origin. Albour, or as it's called today, Alvor, was an important port and fishing town in the time of the Moors. But because there's some things that don't change, it was the same way during the Roman ages. What's more, nowadays, it's the center of sardine and tuna fishing and the fish processing and canning industry. The fact that they managed to solve this without interfering with tourism could be exemplary for all of Europe. We can see or photograph here the nicest representatives of the 10,000 fishing boats registered in the country. In the late 1980s, several nature reserves were developed in the region. The houses of Alvor were rebuilt after the earthquake in 1755 using stones from the Moor fortress, so there's hardly anything left of the castle. However, it's worth seeing the church of Divino Salvador, which was built on a hill and is representative of the famous Manuel-style. According to this, the arch of the gate depicts a large tentacle of an octopus. In medieval chronicles, octopuses with tentacles of 15 or 20 meters are often mentioned, which were considered to be tales or legends for centuries, until the end of the 20th century when several specimens appeared in the Atlantic Ocean. The application of sea patterns was common in the local architecture. However, the use of wantonly interwoven vines and leaves show North African and Arab influence. It's good to know that there are at least as many things in which the Portuguese differ from the Spanish as what they have in common. By far, they're not that cheerful, open, and exhibitionist, but more forbearing, emotional, moderate, honorable, and slow people, in whom the collective spirit, the love of family, and home country is very strong. However, they also like to celebrate, so almost every week there's a state or religious festas, or holiday. Lagos at the delta of the Alvor River is a town founded by the Celts. This river supplies water for the large artificial lake to the north, the Barragem de Rabura. The Arabs landed at Lagos in the 8th century, and from its port, which has been swampy in the meantime, the colonizing ships departed. There must have been a big hustle and bustle here, since the bay is large enough for 400 ships. The cliffs of Ponta de Piedade protect the port from the winds and waves. The sight of the sunset is the most beautiful from here. A 17th century fortress is on the sand of the beach. Behind it, King Sebastian took part in his last mass in the open air, boarding his ship here towards Morocco to disappear forever. He addressed his troops for the last time from a window of one of the houses on Republica Square. The crucifix, which was in the battlefield of Ksar el-Khair, is kept here. The so-called Sebastianism was still characteristic of the Portuguese, even when the ruler was unable to return, if for no other reason than what his age would have been. The longing for the unattainable, a feeling of melancholy, has been a part of the Lusitano soul ever since. This is what they call saudade, and this is where the emotional local music called Fado is rooted. Lagos was a scene of many historical events important not only for Algarve but for all of Portugal. The historic figures are present in the form of statues in the city today, which had been the capital of Algarve before the earthquake of 1755. This is where the statue of Gil Enos, the discoverer, stands. Next to him, Henry the Navigator searches the sea. Although he didn't sail himself, he generously supported the expeditions. What's more, he established a school of navigation. Nuno Tristão, who brought the first shipment of slaves from the Sahara, does not have a statue. There is a memorial plaque, however, marking the place of the first European slave market under the arcades of the Rua de Senhora de Graça. Pedro Nunes wrote the following in the 1500s. There can be no doubt that the sailings of the last 100 years departing from this kingdom were the most wonderful and bravest enterprises, and no other people can boast of similar. The Age of Discovery started in 1415 with the conquest of Ceuta. This was followed by other expeditions along the coasts of Africa, which were motivated by the hope for profits and the hatred of the Islamic religion at the same time. The gold of Guinea and the black slaves brought from the Sahara both meant serious profit, but the real golden age started when Vasco da Gama reached India. This meant that Portugal gained a monopoly for the trading of spices, had the Indian Ocean and its marginal seas under its control, and established a colonial capital in Goa. Then Pedro Álvares Cabral led Brazil under Portuguese rule, and by this the country became such a sea power against which even the Dutch or the British could not stand up, perhaps the Spanish at most. A book entitled The Glory and Victory of the Ludisans from the mid-1500s reads as follows. It was the Portuguese who reached Calicut to create trading and make contracts. They won victories on the Atlantic, Ethiopian, Persian, Indian, and the Boreal seas. They took hold of the spices, pearls, and diamonds, and they brought down the elephants and rhinoceroses of the East and the tigers of Malacca. They revealed many secrets of nature for scientists. They found new stars, sailed on unknown seas, and in unknown climates. They unveiled the ignorance of old geographers. Columbus lived in Portugal for years. He perfected his mastery of geography here and his knowledge of sailing. With his route plan, he first turned to John II, who did not support him, so the expedition departed under the Spanish flag. 5 years later, Vasco da Gama started his journey to India, sailing around Africa. The epic poem Lusíads, the gem of Portuguese literature translated to every civilized language, is about this journey. Pedro Álvares Cabral reached Brazil in April 1500. It's due to the colonization of this large country that the Portuguese language is still the 6th in the list of languages spoken by the most people. Magellan started his journey 20 years later to India and the Spice Islands. His tragic fate was commemorated in an excellent novel by Stefan Zweig. Magellan, on one hand, proved that the earth is round. On the other hand, he started the process of colonization. The conquest of Africa, Asia, and America marked the golden age of Portugal and Spain. Treasures of the conquered lands were transported to Europe mostly by the Portuguese. Already John II reigned over such a land in which the sun never set. The wind compass of Rosa dos Ventos, with its diameter of 43 meters, which had allegedly been made by Henry the Navigator, can be found in the nearby Sagres. Have you ever imagined that you're sitting on the edge of the world and let your legs swing in the nothingness? Well, you can do this at Cabo de São Vicente. In the Middle Ages, it was believed that the 60 to 70 meter high cliff was the end of the world. The Romans called it Promontorium Sacrum, or Sacred Promontory, because the body of Saint Vincent was allegedly washed ashore here. For the same reason, the Portuguese call it Corner of Europe, by its present name. This is where Henry the Navigator lived, and many sea battles were fought at these shores. This is where Admiral Nelson defeated the Spanish fleet in 1797. There's no end to the ships returning from Brazil or the Far East that didn't even need a sea battle to sink. They were diverted by the storms of the Atlantic Ocean and bilged by sharp rocks. This is where the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, the San Juan, the Santa Ana, the San Francisco, Nuestra Señora de Ayuda, and the Gracia sank. The Cape has been an important point of orientation for sailors. The light of its tower, equipped with the most modern technology, can be seen even from 100 kilometers. The name of Alhazur and its castle built on the hilltop originates from the Arabs. Among the ruins of the 10th century fortress, only a cistern and some towers have remained undamaged. However, the view of the neighboring villages and further of the mountain range of the Serra de Monquique is wonderful. They say that the Christians conquered the town under the leadership of Pedro Perez Correa when the Arabs, according to their custom, went to the coast to bathe during the night of the 29th of August. The most beautiful songs, the Faros, originate from Alhazur, and these are presented most emotionally by the local girls. By car, we can quickly reach the romantic and deserted coastline, exposed to the strong currents of the Atlantic Ocean. We can look down from a dizzying height at the bathers among scenic cliffs. On the Praia de Arefana and the Praia de Monteclérigo, there's no trace of the mild, sandy beaches. The towering waves lash their white spray against the sharp, wild rocks. The nearby Praia de Odecaixe is a favorite place for professional surfers. The volcanic mountain of Serra de Monchique protects Algarve from the cold winds. Its highest peak is the Foia with its 902 meters, but from the somewhat lower Picota, the view is nicer due to its better location. From here, the Ponte de Sagres can be seen. The curving road can be completed by a walking tour, but we can reach the peak by car also. In both cases, our route leads along strip-cultivated fields and chestnut forests, higher up, through pine groves. 1/3 of Portugal is covered by forests, an area of 3 million hectares. Most of them are stone pines and cork oaks. The harvested bark of the 3 or 4-year-old trees constitutes almost half of the cork production of the world. Cork is a material that can be used for many different purposes. However, for most of us, the cork of a bottle comes to mind. The famous wine of Porto, according to regulations, can only be sealed by corks made of the best quality Portuguese cork wood. A few decades ago, eucalyptus forests were also planted, and these have at least as many disadvantages as advantages, since these oily trees are very prone to forest fires. Monchique is a handicraft village built in the middle of a hillside at 460 meters. Besides its panoramic view, it's famous for its woodworks, mostly for foldable wooden chairs, which according to certain records, originate from Roman times. The products made from wool are also famous, along with the local arquebus brandy, the Madrono. The moving statue erected in the town center imitates a watermill, implying the springs and creeks of the region. Igreja Matriz, the 16th century Manuel-style church, and the ruined Franciscan monastery on the hillside are beautiful. The latter is called Nostra Senhora de Desterro, and it was established in 1632 by Dom Pedro da Silva. The hot water spring of Caldas de Monchique babbles 6 kilometers to the south. Its medicinal waters bring relief for indigestion and rheumatic pains. Accommodation is provided for visitors, and not just anywhere, but in a posada. This is actually the local equivalent of the Spanish parador, namely a lodging house furnished in an old building, a mansion, palace, mill, castle, or monastery. The lovely city of Silves, crowned by an Arab fortress, lies on the bank of the Arade River, among slopes abundant in orange and lemon groves. Near the holiday resorts of Algarve, we find an impressive fortress built of red stone that matches the Moor monuments of Spain. As we learn from the work of Idrissi, Arab traveler and historian, the Arabs made Silves their capital by the name of Zelb. They praise not only the beauty of the city, but also its culture. It was considered to be the home of poets, historians, and orators. In the 8th century, it belonged under the Caliphate of Damascus. Around 1027, under Ibn Mozain, it became an independent province. In 1053, the famous palace of the poet king Al-Mu'tamid, the Palace of the Verandas, stood here. Mu'tamid has been considered an outstanding figure of Arab poetry up to this day. The palace was built of limestone. There were hardly any wooden constructions, so the Dutch and German crusaders tried in vain to set fire to the building. Only in 1242 were the Knights of Santiago able to seize the palace. This was around the times when the Catholic kings of Spain drove the Moors out of Andalusia. A romantic spectacle of the palace is the Cisterna de Mora Encantada, or the Cistern of the Enchanting Moor Girl. In the Castle district stands the Cathedral Say, built on the site of the former mosque. Opposite is the Church of Misericordia from the 16th century. The Archaeological Museum of the city was opened in 1990. While in the palace there are mostly Moor relics, here we can find items from earlier ages, such as materials from Paleolithic and Neolithic excavations, findings from the Bronze Age, and mostly statues, capitals, and fragments. The exhibition hall was built around an Arab cistern, excavated in 1980, the stairs of which lead to a depth of 15 meters. A scenic serpentine mountain road leads to the neat little village of Alte. The ornamented Nossa Senhora de Assunção rises above the whitewashed little houses. From here, the Fonte Grande, the continuation of the Alta River, is only a 10-minute walk. It's a popular place for excursions. From here, hikers and jeep safaris depart to the untrodden paths of the mountains of this region. Besides the 5-meter-high waterfall of Queda de Figaro, we can also find an old watermill converted into a restaurant. The Cross of Portugal stands between Silves and Alte. The 3-meter-high Renaissance Cruz de Portugal, richly decorated with engravings, was donated to the city by Manuel I when the body of John II was taken from the Cathedral of Silves. Today, he is in his final resting place in the Dominican Abbey of Batalha, next to John I and his English wife, Philippa of Lancaster, and next to Henry the Navigator. Loulé has a moor castle also, but it's more famous for its perforated filigree chimneys, which are characteristic of all of Algarve. However, the nicest can be found here. The little market town, also known for its craftsmen, is becoming the commercial center of the region. The axis of the town is a wide avenue, with a line of trees in the middle with shops lining both sides. The center of Loulé is the market hall with its pink cupola. The gypsies hold their markets separately here. In the hall, food products, vegetables, fruit, and handicrafts are sold. Between the April the 9th Street and the Igrejo Matriz, we can see how these items are made. This is where they carve wooden objects, make hats, weave fabric, make belts and trappings for horses and other leather projects, paint azulejo tiles, make pottery, and make lace. People still go to the old well as they used to hundreds of years ago. Some of them take water in cans, others bring their clothes here to wash. At the table of the cafe, a regular guest is a statue of a local poet, proving that Loulé has given not only craftsmen to the country. Villarreal de Santo Antonio is a frontier town at the estuary of the Guadania River. Here there is ferry traffic between Portugal and Spain. It was devastated by a seaquake in the 18th century. Marquis of Pombal had it rebuilt. In front of the church on the main square, there's an obelisk erected in honor of him, reaching to the sky. A lighthouse rises at the end of the mole. The port enjoys considerable commercial traffic, mostly tin and copper is shipped abroad. The processing of fish is a traditional trade here. The tuna festival held in June is very famous. The water of the beach of the town, the Monte Gordo, is the warmest in all of Portugal. Castro Marim is only 3 kilometers from Santo Antonio, where a medieval castle and the ruins of the 17th century fortress can be visited. Among old, colorful barges, more and more yachts ask for admittance. In Tavira, a town that lies on the banks of the Gilao River, many old churches and mansions can be seen. The 2 banks are connected by a bridge from Roman times, which looks very much like the one in Silves. Tavira was also a Moor center. Once the biggest mosque of Algarve stood here. It was demolished and only ruins remained of the castle, although once it was an ideal basis for the Moroccan fortresses. Moreover, it played a significant role in the battles against the pirates. Tavira is famous for its tuna fishing today. In spring, the fishermen observe the schools of fish swimming towards the Mediterranean Sea. They put out their nets, and when the fish return after spawning on the same route, they're trapped. 1 or 2 decades ago, fishermen used to jump into the water to kill these fish, sometimes as big as 400 kilograms, in physical battle. However, today, only factory fishing and canning remains. Ria Formosa has been a nature reserve since 1987. From the center of Tavira, we can sail here to the world of swamps, sand dunes, reefs, and reeds. The warm water of the lagoon is full of oysters and other edible sea creatures. There's even mussel farming due to the favorable conditions. Numerous rare and protected types of waterfowl live in Ria Formosa. Great egrets, red-beaked pochards, flamingos, sea mews, and Eurasian coots, for example. Some North European birds also like to spend the winter here. A bird hospital was developed in Quinta da Marine, 3 kilometers from Ohio, and this is the center of education for natural science. This is from where once salted fish, which the famous garum was made of, was shipped to the Roman Empire. This less appetizing condiment was made of the intestines of salted fish, rotted in the sun. In Quinta de Marim, the Portuguese water dog, Cão de Água, is bred, an animal on the verge of extinction. The helper of the fisherman was a very widespread animal in all of Algarve. When needed, it dived for a fish that had escaped from the net or brought up the hawser. This sensible, docile, untiring, dark-colored dog, which grew to as much as 50 to 60 centimeters in height and 20 to 25 kilograms in weight, could also be sent to the coast as a messenger. The narrow 11-kilometer-long Ilha de Tavira, with its sand dunes, offers great opportunities for bathing. It's only accessible by boat and is mostly popular with the local young people. The timetable of the boats is adjusted to the bathers. There are more lines in the morning for the early birds, but also for those who like to sleep in. People can sail back to town for lunch since there's no opportunity for dining on the island. The last ships return to Tavira at sunset. The narrow roads protecting from the flaming sun and the box-like white houses with their flat roofs inspire the atmosphere of an African oasis. The biggest fishing port and canning factory of the region can be found in Olhão. A few years ago, donkeys walking in the water carrying baskets of fish were a common sight. The village was raised to the rank of a town in 1808 after 17 fishermen under the leadership of Gaucho and Nobre sailed to Rio de Janeiro without a map, to be the first to let the exiled king know of the departure of Napoleon's troops. This event was made eternal by the heroic epic of José Agostinho de Macedo, The New Argonauts. Another famous spectacle of the town is the Festival de Marisco, or the Festival of Seafood, which is held in August every year. At this time, the tables lined up at the port groan with seafood, each more delicious than the other. There's lobster and crayfish, oyster and octopus, sea urchin and caviar, fish, clams, and calamari. It becomes lively only for the time of the festival. Otherwise, calm and tranquility await the visitors all year round. From the quay, the boatmen take us to the little islands belonging to the nature reserve of Ria Formosa, Armona, Culatra, and Faro. Behind the salt distillers and the mussel farms, we can find undisturbed places for bathing. The two famous sites of Estói are separated by a 10-minute walk and 1,800 years in time. One of them is the Melreas group of buildings from Roman times. The other is a Palacio Estói. The palace, standing not far from the main square, was built in Rococo style, which makes it unique in the region. The nobleman who saw it in a dream died shortly after the construction started. More than half a century later, it was finished by a wealthy local resident according to the original plans. This building brought a Vicomte rank to the owner and fame to Domingos de Silva Meira, the architect. Nearly a century later, today the palace is in need of renovation again, which is being done by the local government. However, the garden of the palace, ornate with palm trees, is still open to visitors. On the lower terrace, surrounded by orange groves, stands a little house with blue and white tiles, which is ornamented by a replica of Canova's Three Graces. On the main terrace, the Patamar de Casa do Presépio, fountains depicting nymphs and statue niches covered with tiles may be seen. Portugal is still not as well known by tourists as Italy, France, or Spain. Perhaps getting to know its monuments and natural treasures takes more time, but if we go there with an open heart and we're well prepared, the remote Portugal will open up and reveal its secrets to us.